Hey everyone, this is chapter 1 of Daniel Randall's Confronting Antisemitism on the Left, Arguments for Socialists. The chapter is just titled Introduction. Antisemitism on the left is not a new phenomenon. It has roots stretching back 150 years or more. However, many readers may have been alerted to the issue only relatively recently. Between 2015 and 2019, the issue was thrust into the national spotlight in Britain by the unexpected ascendancy of a section of the left to the leadership of the Labour Party. I saw that ascendancy as an immense opportunity to renew left-wing politics in Britain, push back the Thatcherite orthodoxy that dominated political life, and revitalize working-class struggle. I also saw it as a vital opportunity for the socialist left to reckon with its own imperfections and flaws, a reckoning made both more difficult and more necessary by the pressure of circumstance. One of those flaws was the presence of anti-Semitic ideas within sections of the left. New section. Why left anti-Semitism matters. Anti-Semitism is not merely, quote, Jew hatred, end quote. Anti-Semitism is connected to and ultimately stems from an ideological narrative based on claims of a world-shaping power which is identified implicitly or explicitly as Jewish. Anti-Semitism can manifest as direct bigotry, prejudice, or chauvinism towards Jewish people, expressed in writing, speech, or actions. It can also manifest as expressions of that ideological narrative or versions of it. For proponents of that narrative, such expressions may not imply hostility to individual Jews, but are claimed to be only a political opposition to a perceived power. Anti-Semitism is, therefore, a toxic force, even when those expressing anti-Semitic ideas have no personal animus towards Jews as such. The primary focus of this book is revolutionary socialist parties and groups, radical social movements, and the Labour Party, particularly the Labour Party's left wing. Most attention will be on the left in Britain, but examples from other countries will sometimes be referred to. Left anti-Semitism hugely distorts left-wing politics. As a fuel for bigotry, it undermines the left's ability to fight for equality. As a form of conspiracy theory, which attempts to identify the individual, quote, bankers, or, quote, elite financiers, pulling the strings of world affairs, it undermines the left's ability to explain capitalism as a system of openly functioning class relations that can be overthrown by mass collective action. Left anti-Semitism can thereby miseducate and Left anti-Semitism thereby miseducates and misleads, serving to protect rather than challenge existing systems of power. It peddles conspiracy theories about Zionism and promotes a perspective that sees the world as divided into discrete, quote, imperialist and, quote, anti-imperialist, end quote, blocks, with the entire, quote, anti-imperialist bloc ordained as necessarily progressive, regardless of the actual political program of the states and movements claimed to comprise it. Thus, left anti-Semitism distorts necessary solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for self-determination by cheerleading for reactionary forces that cynically claim to represent it, and by insisting that such solidarity can be built only on a political foundation that opposes Israeli Jewish national rights and therefore rejects equality. I'm not writing this book because I think left anti-Semitism is worse or more of an immediate threat to Jews than other forms of anti-Semitism, particularly far-right, white supremacist anti-Semitism. Forms of far-right nationalism are in power, or close to power, in many countries across the world. This demands a distinct analysis of anti-Semitism's place at what the anti-racist activist Eric Ward called the, quote, theoretical core of white nationalism, end quote. The labor movement also needs to take anti-fascist and anti-racist direct action and self-defense seriously, and particularly work must be done to foster anti-racist solidarity between Jews and other victims, historic and contemporary, of racialized oppression. But the fact that there may be other forms of anti-Semitism that are more dangerous in an immediate physical sense does not absolve the left of the responsibility to confront the forms of anti-Semitism that exist within our own movement. On the contrary, doing so becomes even more urgent. If we are unable to do that, our efforts to combat anti-Semitism in general will be significantly hindered. And, beyond that, If we are unable to confront reactionary ideas in our own movement, we'll always be inhibited in pursuing our ultimate aim, the socialist transformation of society. New section, Labor's anti-Semitism debate. What the fuck? An alternative position. Much has been made by defenders of Labor's 2015 to 2019 leadership of the way in which the issue of anti-Semitism was, quote, exploited or, quote, weaponized by centrist or right-wing critics inside the party and beyond in order to attack the left. Even some leftists who accepted that left anti-Semitism was a real phenomenon expended more energy lamenting its exploitation by our opponents than actually confronting it within our ranks. Others have insisted the entire notion is a, quote, fabrication or a, quote, smear. In the more lurid versions of this position, it was claimed that the issue was fabricated directly by the Israeli state. Some local Laborite parties passed motions accusing pro-Israel MPs of being agents of, quote, interference by a foreign power, end quote. The irony of denying the existence of left anti-Semitism while advancing a conspiracy theory about the hidden hand of Israel and Zionism manipulating political affairs in Britain was apparently lost on the partisans of this particular viewpoint. Conversely, some critics of left anti-Semitism... What the hell is falling out of this tree? Conversely, some critics of left anti-Semitism insisted that the problem was not the ideas of a section of the left, even a large and influential section, but radical left-wing politics as such. This argument reached its risible logical conclusion in March 2019 when Labour MP Ziobain McDonough drew an equivalence and causal link between anti-Semitism and any opposition to capitalism. McDonough said in a radio interview that, quote, it's very much part of ... hard left politics to be against capitalists and to see Jewish people as the financiers of capital. Ergo, you are anti-Jewish people, end quote. When asked by the interviewer, quote, to be anti-capitalist, do you have to be anti-Semitic, end quote, McDonough replied, quote, yes. In other words, because some anti-Semites code capitalism as, quote, Jewish, end quote, to be against capitalism is to be against Jews. Ironically, in our efforts to oppose anti-Semitism, McDonough allowed anti-Semites to set the terms of debate. Between this anti-left tendency on the one side and the denialists and downplayers on the other, there was and is what might be called a third camp, not a point of neutral equidistance between the two, but an entirely alternative independent position. This position acknowledges the existence of left anti-Semitism, but rather than seeing left anti-Semitism as a logical or even inevitable outgrowth of foundational left-wing ideas, such as radical democracy, equality, and social ownership, considers it as a distortion that threatens those ideas. Although the issue has sometimes been raised cynically, or was less widespread than sometimes claimed, that did and does not mean it was unworthy of attention. It is right to criticize the exploitation of anti-Semitism by those whose wider agenda is to block the advance of any form of left-wing politics at all, and, like critics of anti-Semitism from, for example, the Tory right, are often at best inconsistent opponents of other forms of bigotry or even of anti-Semitism itself. Nor did many figures from the, quote, New Labour, end quote, Blairite wing of the Labour Party, who, in government, also pursued anti-migrant policies and appealed to nationalist and chauvinist prejudices, have an entirely consistent record of opposition to all forms of bigotry. But the highlighting or even exploitation of anti-Semitism by such people does not mean left anti-Semitism does not exist. There's some quote from George Orwell where he's talking about something about like Stalinism. It's like, and XYZ is true, even if, some Tory MP says it's true. Anyway, Anti-Semitism has indeed been, quote, weaponized, but as the socialist writer and lawyer David Renton succinctly put it, quote, you can't weaponize something that isn't there, end quote. I think David Renton used to be in the Socialist Workers' Party. I'm not sure if he is still, which is the big Trotskyist party in the United Kingdom. The way to deal with such a problem is to deal with it, rather than continually bemoaning that our opponents have called attention to it. Against both those who deny the existence of the problem and those who claim the problem is left-wing politics as such, the third, independent position understands that the most articulate analyses of left anti-Semitism come from within the far left itself, and that, far from requiring a break from the classical ideas of leftism, the task of confronting left anti-Semitism requires a reconnection with them. It is that position that this book seeks to advance. New section, Challenging Anti-Semitism on the Left from the Left. This book stands in the tradition of an earlier book, Steve Cohen's That's Funny, You Don't Look Anti-Semitic, which will be referred to hereafter as That's Funny, first published in 1984 and reprinted twice since, once in 2005 and most recently in 2019 by No Passaran Media, by whom this book is also published. That's Funny, while pioneering in the context of the British far left of the 1980s, was by no means the first attempt to grapple with the problem of anti-Semitism on the left. A century earlier, activists in Germany's Social Democratic Party, then a mass revolutionary workers' party, used the label, quote, socialism of fools, end quote, originating with the Austrian liberal Ferdinand Kronewetter, to critique invective against, quote, Jewish capitalists, end quote. Their critique was often flawed and limited, but it represented an acknowledgement of a specific challenge posed to left-wing politics by anti-Semitism. In the British labor movement and left of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jewish radicals and their allies, including Eleanor Marx, the daughter of Karl Marx, confronted the nationalist anti-Semitism that impelled many labor movement bodies, including the Trades Union Congress, to lobby the state to impose restrictions on Jewish immigration that would become the 1905 Aliens Act, an episode surveyed in some detail in That's Funny. Marx spoke on the platform of rallies opposing immigration controls, and Jewish workers' unions sponsored the publication of a pamphlet entitled A Voice from the Aliens, which argued against nationalist anti-Semitism and for solidarity between British-born and Jewish migrant workers. Jewish activists in the international socialist movement attempted to win the movement to a more combative stance against anti-Semitism, often unsuccessfully. In 1891, the 1891 Brussels Congress of the Second International, the main international network of socialist and labor parties, voted down a resolution proposed by American Jewish socialist Abraham Kahan, founding editor of the Yiddish socialist paper Forward, advocating a determined fight against anti-Semitism. Instead, the Congress supported a resolution that opposed, quote, anti-Semitic and philo-Semitic incitement, end quote, equally. In the late 1920s, Trotskyist dissidents in the USA, such as Max Shachtman, criticized the Communist Party of the USA and other communist parties internationally, but then passed the point of no return on their journey to Stalinization for supporting anti-Semitic attacks against Jewish settlers in Palestine. In the late 1930s, Leon Trotsky called out anti-Semitic attacks on himself and other dissident Bolsheviks by the Stalinist regime. In the 1960s, dissident Polish socialists denounced the anti-Semitism of the Stalinist regime in that country. Jacek Kuran, whose open letter to the Communist Party of Poland is on this channel. Where was I? One of the authors of the open letter to the party, okay, that's on this channel, that would provide some of the ideological foundations of Solidarność, the mass Polish workers' movement of the 1980s, declared, quote, there are certain situations in which any honest person should consider himself Jewish, end quote. On the British left, several Jewish supporters of the Communist Party of Great Britain, CPGB, left or were expelled as dissident critics of anti-Semitism in the Eastern Bloc and the Communist Party Great Britain leadership's suppression of discussion of it. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, when some far-left groups led a campaign to ban, quote, Zionists, end quote, and later to ban campus Jewish societies, others on the left opposed that campaign for what it was, an expression of anti-Semitism on the left, even though the advocates of the bans were usually careful to talk about, quote, Zionists rather than, quote, Jews. What Cohen's book did was to set down in one place a comprehensive analysis of left anti-Semitism, tracing its historical origins and suggesting a political framework via which it could be confronted. Cohen did not assess left anti-Semitism as an outsider to the left, but as a far-left activist, aiming to help transform the left. While reams of commentary on left anti-Semitism has been written since 2015, very little has come close to Cohen's book in terms of being comprehensive yet succinct and highly accessible. Other compact left-wing activist critiques of left anti-Semitism written more recently, such as April Rosenblum's The Past Didn't Go Anywhere, published in 2017, and the anti-fascist activist Spencer Sunshine's essay Looking Left at Anti-Semitism, published in 2019, have recommended Cohen's book as key further reading. Such is the enduring value of its analysis that in 2019, the Jewish labor movement, a group whose politics Cohen did not share, and the majority of whose contemporary leaders certainly do not share many, probably most of Cohen's political conclusions, chose to distribute a copy of the reprinted edition to every single one of their members. The labor-left group Momentum, in what has been one of a well-intentioned, if sporadic and inconsistent, series of attempts to confront the issue of anti-Semitism, also urged supporters to read Cohen's book. In both instances, I felt at the time that if the leadership of the Labor Party itself had chosen to do the same, it would probably have made more of a positive impact via that one act than via the aggregated effect of almost everything else it said or did on the issue. I write, as Cohen did, as a grassroots activist of the far left, and intend this book as a work of polemic rather than scholarship. This book, like his, sees the task of uprooting left anti-Semitism as a fundamental imperative for the left itself, a prerequisite for making our movement fit to achieve its aims, which must be situated within a general effort of transformation, aiming to forge a left more consistently committed to equality and liberation. Cohen wrote of his book that, quote, what is written here is not in any way presented as a last word. Rather, it is an attempt to open up a genuine debate on the left, end quote. The same is true of this work. While I hope anyone interested in anti-Semitism, political thought in general, and historic engagement between Jews and the left specifically will find this book valuable, or at least thought-provoking. Its primary intended audience is socialist activists concerned to improve the political health of our movement, hence its subtitle, quote, Arguments for Socialists. Like Steve Cohen, I believe in a socialism based on the values of liberty, equality, and solidarity. Like Steve Cohen, I see working-class struggles as the means for achieving such a society, and anti-Stalinist and pre-Stalinist revolutionary socialism as the best available intellectual and activist tradition for politically orienting the means and ends of that struggle. And like Steve Cohen, I believe that this involves an unflinching confrontation with ideological trends that threaten to distort our politics as part of a wider effort to transform, renew, and reinvigorate our movement in order that we can hope to accomplish the goals we set for ourselves. This book aims to be a contribution to that effort. End of chapter 1. Thank you for listening.